Hi, everybody, and welcome. This is the Pearson Center Presents, and today we're going to be talking about a fantastic topic. It's an extension of what we call the future of work. First of all, I want to say thank you for joining us, all of you, and we love your comments, and we will have some questions at the end. So you'll see in your question box, please provide your questions. We'll go through them, and we'll bring them to the panelists near the end of the show. That said, first of all, we're missing one person, as you can see by your screen. That is Indira Naidu-Harris. Unfortunately, Indira had a personal situation with her family, and she is unable to attend at this moment, but I do want to send her our best wishes at this time. So Indira, we look forward to seeing you again really soon at the Pearson Center Presents. So on behalf of our chair, Dr. Karen Mock, I would like to say welcome again to everybody for this. My name is Scott Sims. I am the president and CEO of the Pearson Center, filling in for Indira today. Hopefully I can do a somewhat reasonable job, given her past performances with our particular broadcasts. So today, what we are talking about, again, this is the future of work, and we've subtitled this A Talk of Transition in the Green Economy. So in the past couple years, Jonathan, who's going to be our moderator here, he's done a few of these, and we've talked about the future of work, but we talked about it in the context of the pandemic. And following 3 years of upheaval, as you know, what does the future of work look like? Today, we are talking about, of course, the transition to that green economy. And what will the economy look like under the clean tech Canadian economy, which was a major theme in the budget of spring of 2023, jobs for the clean tech economy. Clear signs of climate change are around us, folks. It's all over. We've seen a rash of wildfires that ravaged not just North America, but around the globe. Record high temperatures, every month and every day as it proceeds, we still reach record highs. And it's the talk now that we have pulled ourselves out of this pandemic conversation and now into the environment. And as we speak, yet another Category 5 hurricane has developed in the Atlantic, eyeing the Caribbean and the eastern coast of the United States, and hopefully stays away from this country. So that said, we now get into, but I want to introduce our guests. And our guests are no strangers to many of you if you've been tuned into our Pearson Center events. I want to introduce our first guest, Minister Seamus O'Regan, who joins us once again. It's good to see you, sir. He was first elected Member of Parliament, St. John South Mount Pearl in 2015. He was re-elected in 2019, 2021. He's currently Minister of Labour and Minister for Seniors in the recent shuffle. O'Regan also previously served as Canadian Natural Resources Minister, Minister of Indigenous Services, Minister of Veterans Affairs, and Associate Minister of National Defence. Here's what's interesting. He is from Canada's easternmost province, Newfoundland and Labrador. He was born in St. John's and raised in Goose Bay, Labrador. He is one of those few who can check both boxes when they say they've come from Newfoundland and Labrador. So congratulations on that alone, Minister.
Thank you.
As Executive Director of Canada's Building Trades Union, Association of 14 international unions representing over 600,000 members, Sean Strickland, responsible for overseeing the operations of the CBTU office, including advocating for progressive public policies, much like he's doing here today, that benefit his membership and securing work opportunities for unionized construction. Before joining CBTU, Sean worked in business development for a large general contractor. Prior to that, was CEO of a joint labor management organization in Ontario, the Ontario Construction Secretariat. Sean sits on numerous boards, including one group that I really like, Helmets to Hard Hats. Very familiar with them. Skill Plan, the Canadian Development Corporation, is chair of the Build Force Canada. Sean, welcome once again.
Thank you.
Pat Dalzell of Bruce Power. Pat is Executive Director of Corporate Affairs at Bruce Power, a role primarily focused on the development and growth of the corporate identity through government, stakeholder engagement, corporate and community communications. He's promoting areas of innovation and the use of nuclear isotopes in the fight against cancer, which is a very important role, sir, for you. Pat started his career at Bruce Power in 2011. Senior financial trader he was at the time. He worked on the Geographic Diversification Initiative. 2015, he embarked on a new position with Bruce Power, working alongside Chief Investment Officer and oversee the investment risk management. And of course, we want to welcome you today, sir. I think you've been with us before, if I'm not mistaken, Pat.
I have had the pleasure of joining one of the panels where I got to speak a lot about the role we play in isotope production in the healthcare system globally.
Well, sir, it's great to have you back in the context of this because, as you know, as we talk about climate change, energy consumption rises, and of course, we're glad to have you with us because you're certainly a big part of that sector. All right, enough from me. We now turn it over to an esteemed colleague of mine. He is a board member for quite a long-standing board member. He is Professor Jonathan Kaloff. He's professor at the Telford School of Management at the University of Ottawa, international expert on foresight and competitive intelligence. That sounds very lofty. He is also a UNESCO professor and co-chair of anticipatory systems for innovation and new ventures. And of course, as I mentioned, he is a board member of ours. Professor Dr. Kaloff, the show, sir, is now yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott, and congratulations. This is your first time doing one of these webinars as our new CEO president. So really welcome aboard. Now we're doing it officially. Secondly, thank you so much for calling me old without using the word old, but that's okay. I'll let that go. I saw Seamus smiling on that one. I got to tell you, to have the three of you here for this conversation. So the last webinar we did was on the big issues facing Canada. And the environment came up as one of the top issues. We've talked about the workers of tomorrow. People have mentioned about this. It's finally we have a time where we can bring the big issue facing Canada, one of them, with a big issue facing the workforce of tomorrow. And look what I've got here. I've got Pat, you're the power guy. You want to talk about clean tech, you're it. Sean, you're building and trades. That is at the center of a lot of the conversation we're going to be having today. And I know you've given a lot of speeches on it. And Seamus, you've been such an enormous help in my Newfoundland program. We'll talk about that offline afterwards in getting jobs, in helping transform industries. It's been admirable. You're also one of the only people I met, and we'll get back to this as we have time at the end, who've actually talked about polarization as it applies to clean tech and the energy. And I thought, gee, this is kind of like getting all three areas together at one point. So I think, Scott did a great job of introducing what we're going to talk about. I thought just to start it off, I'd give you each, 1 to 2 minutes just to talk a bit about what you see as the big issues as we start moving towards this clean tech economy environment, and specifically as it applies to the jobs of tomorrow. And I'm going to start with Sean. Just 1 to 2 minutes on what you see.
Thanks, Jonathan. I think that the government is doing a lot of good things with respect to providing a legislative framework for us to, in many cases, reindustrialize the Canadian economy. And I think that it's important for us to look at the context of net zero decarbonization. So between now and 2050, to get to a net zero carbon economy, this is going to be the largest transformation of the Canadian economy since the Industrial Revolution. So it's critically important. Like, it's easy for us to say, let's get to net zero carbon, but what does that entail in terms of, the new energy sources of the future and how we're going to manage that transition? Because we know from the building trades unions that we have a lot of workers. We have 60,000 members in Alberta. I would say 95% of them work in oil and gas. We have 15,000 members in Newfoundland and Labrador. A lot of them work in oil and gas and offshore oil production. So it's critically important we get this right, because as we transition to net zero, we're going to lose jobs. And so how do we manage this transition so that we can, as we lose those jobs, we bring in the new jobs of the future in new nuclear, SMRs, hydrogen, carbon sequestration, and renewables. So it's critically important for us to manage that transition from our perspective so no worker gets left behind. And I think that the biggest risk, we can talk about all the policy initiatives, they're not all perfect, but they're heading in the right direction. I think the biggest risk to this transition, quite frankly, is the regulatory approval process. And you're hearing a lot of pushback in Alberta, for example, in terms of decarbonization and emission caps and how are we going to achieve that and not have a production cap at the same time? So it's critically important for us to get the regulatory approvals in place for new nuclear, for SMRs, for mining that's going to provide all these new energy sources in the future, the lithium and critical minerals for electric vehicles and electric cars. There's a lot going on, and a lot of the future success of a net zero carbon world for Canada depends on us getting that regulatory regime correct and having the right policies in place to make sure no worker gets left behind.
I like that. Pat, what about you from your perspective?
Well, maybe I'll just start by, letting some folks who might not be familiar on the call with, letting you know what Bruce Power does, who we are, what we do.
Sure.
So we're actually the largest operating nuclear facility in the world, and we're located in Ontario on the shores of Lake Huron in the small rural town of Tiverton, Ontario, where from that site we operate 2 stations with 4 CANDU reactors each, so providing about a third of Ontario's electricity from Tiverton, Ontario. From that site, we, of course, as was mentioned before, produce the bulk of the world's cobalt-60, which is used to sterilize medical equipment and treat various forms of cancer. And the reason I kind of create that context, from rural Ontario, one spot producing a third of Ontario's electricity, is because of the tremendous opportunity that nuclear power represents when you talk about the fight against climate change and the energy transition. We often think of energy transition as what's off in the future. What are we going to do 10, 15, 20 years from now to meet net zero by 2050? I like to point to what's happening right now. And actually, as of this morning, as of 1 a.m. in the morning, we completed our first major component replacement by bringing Unit 6 back online. And to create some context, our life extension program, which will operate our site out to 2064, is essentially refurbishing, rebuilding the reactors on our site so that we can operate for the next 4 decades and beyond. And bringing Unit 6 back online today was one step in that refurbishment program, but a very important one. We've proven that this industry, the nuclear industry, can get major nuclear infrastructure projects done on time and on budget, while creating good jobs, supporting the local community, and most importantly, providing enough clean electricity. This one unit alone produces enough clean electricity to power a city the size of Ottawa. So significant achievement, certainly today, and something that we're very proud of, and we're looking to expand on in the future.
Terrific. Thank you for that, Pat. Seamus, you're one of the guys at the center of this as well. What do you see as the big issues as we transition?
Well, first of all, I just wanted to tell Pat how much I appreciate that breaking news. I'm a big proponent of nuclear because I'm laser focused on emissions, and nuclear makes the case. It's probably, not only is it incredibly well regulated, and in terms of waste management, but overall our nuclear industry is tier 1 in the world. If Sean was mentioning about regulatory being a competitive advantage, and in terms of environmental assessments, we probably do have a lot more work to do in streamlining that process without losing the integrity of it. But nuclear has always gotten it right. And our nuclear regime in Canada is actually a competitive advantage, if you can believe regulatory regimes can be, and they can. So kudos to both of you, by the way. It's really good to see you. I think what I would just concentrate on is just the amount of change that is happening at once, and not just in the energy industry, but throughout society. I think that workers are going through an awful lot. Yesterday we saw some polling numbers about people's thoughts on the federal government. In fact, I was with David Coletto yesterday. I was with Atlantic Canadian MPs. We were at a caucus retreat in Mabou, Cape Breton. David was actually sitting next to me as those numbers broke and was walking us through them. That quantifies something that I've known for a while. I think a number of us have known for a while. People are going through an incredible amount of change. The only thing that people are thinking about right now are interest rates. It's driving them nuts. It affects their mortgages. It affects their rents, groceries. Inflation is controlled, but prices are not going down, and people are feeling this. So if they get cold called about how you feel about the government at the moment, it's not going to be pretty. I don't think this is, this is a surprise. This is what dictates it. But underlying that And we can get into the politics. I'm looking forward to that, Jonathan, getting into the politics of this, because it's incredibly important. And Sean fights this battle as well. But I would say, when I was out at BC for the longshoreman strike and was out there a couple of weeks trying to, to work with them and with the BCMEA on getting a deal to get our supply chains working again back out there, the biggest issue for them, the biggest anxiety is technology as well. AI, is scaring the bejesus out of everybody. The prospect of AI, what does it mean? Automation, right now, the Roberts Bank Terminal 2, which is another shipping container port that will be on our West Coast, is going to have a high degree of automation, and that scares workers. Now, empirically, I can tell you right now that automation has actually created more union jobs. Because it's increased their efficiency, and as they build up automation, they're using union labor to construct or to put together to maintain. But it's the feeling, like what is it really going to mean? How far is it going to go? And when you are in we got a few storms here happening at the same time. When you were talking about the biggest labor shortage in Canadian history, a particularly acute skilled labor shortage, and none of everything we've talked about, whether it be nuclear or a just transition in terms of overall energy production, and none of this happens without workers. So how they feel, and our ability to attract more, particularly to energy producing industries in this country, is absolutely critical to Canada. This is how they feel, how secure they feel in a world where we have climate change running amok, where you've got a land war in Europe that is incredibly unpredictable and toxic and harmful, and you've got interest rates and inflation. People are disgruntled and they are anxious, and that is never a good thing for an economy, and it's never a good thing for people's health. I know this. So that this is all happening now, and this is going to have a huge effect on our country if we don't acknowledge it, empathize with it, capture it, and try to assuage it.
So I like this. I'm hearing a common theme here in terms of the regulatory framework that Sean brought up, the concept of how are workers feeling, how do we transition them. Pat, I love you really brought us into competitive advantage. I'm a strategy prof, so obviously I got excited with that. So I'm going to start off trying to tie a few of these things in together. And there was a report done by Clean Energy in 2021, and I think, Seamus, this hits right to you. That's 200,000 jobs are going to be created by Canada by the year 2030 in clean tech. Now, I will tell you definitively, because I did a couple projects on this in Alberta, if all the universities in Alberta shut down tomorrow and opened up just for environmental engineers, that still wouldn't fill the demand that we got. So the question becomes, and I realize it's a long-term thing, which politically has its own implications. Where are we going to get those 200,000 workers from? How will they be developed, especially as you pointed out, Seamus, the massive amount of change and the disgruntlement right now? Where is this going to come from? Because workers are at the center of this new economy.
Totally. I'll speak to it briefly, and maybe I'll throw it over to you, Sean, because I think you could really provide more light on this than I could. But I would say I think 200,000 is a very conservative figure, small c conservative. I think that, and I think we have to be very broad in how we look upon clean tech jobs. It doesn't mean you have to come from a program at a college that says it's green or clean tech. I can tell you, actually, depending on who you're talking to, labeling it green is not necessarily attractive to some people. They just see it as it makes it political. Like I remember, my first visit to Alberta as Minister of Natural Resources, the head of the Crane Operators Union in Alberta, saying, I got to tell you, like, for some of us, we don't care, as a crane operator, whether we're lifting a pipeline or a wind turbine. Work is work. So the last thing I want to do is politicize that work so it doesn't draw people to it. Do you know what I mean? That will be helpful. In other words, there are a lot of people who are already in the industry with the skills that we need, doing what they do. Okay. They just got to do it over there. You know what I mean? Whether it's, we just got to make sure that they know that the work is real. Alberta, despite this recent ban, which I think is really unfortunate, but I don't think it's insurmountable, because the bottom line is Alberta is well ahead of the rest of the country on wind and solar. Like, nobody is even close to them on wind and solar. And what I've seen here in Newfoundland is, from Trades NL, which Sean, as he said, he works with all the time. It's mind blowing to me. There's a place, Argentia, which is a former American base in the Second World War, where actually close by Roosevelt met with Churchill. It's a brownfield site. They are going ahead with the first monopile marshalling site in North America. They are basically going to be putting together those structures that are needed at the foundation of these wind turbines for the entire eastern seaboard. And up the way at Come By Chance, they're going to be doing sustainable aviation fuel and recycled diesel, and this is all happening, and these workers are just moving over into it. It's just a different project. So the less you politicize this, the more you just make sure work is work, the better. That will certainly help. But overall, the problem is real. We still have a massive skilled labor shortage, and that's where I'm going to throw it over to Sean.
Yeah.
He can. I'm sure he has all the answers on this.
Sean, you got no choice on that one, buddy. You've just been thrown under the bus. So away you go.
No,
Let me just add, we all got to work together on this, and I work very closely with Sean, because this is a serious issue, and it is all hands on deck. Over to you, buddy.
Right. Yeah, and we are certainly appreciate that working relationship, Seamus, and also we have a very good working relationship with Bruce Power, and we appreciate that as well. Pat, let me just pick up a little bit on what Seamus said earlier before I get into the worker supply kind of question. So, workers are nervous. Canadians are nervous. We've done polling with our members around this transition and net zero. And to put it bluntly and not very politely, many of our members see net zero as net zero jobs.
Yeah.
So we have some work to do, and the minister's aware of this, and we've recast it, and the government's recast it, their messaging around this a little bit more, to talk about the jobs of the future and sustainable jobs. And so I think that's important to put more of a positive spin on this, because workers see net zero and they say, oh my God, okay, what do I do about a job? Meanwhile, we've also done additional polling that the number one concern for our members is personal finances. So, when your mortgage goes up $800 a month, and okay, how am I going to get overtime and your grocery bills and all these other kinds of things? So personal finances is a real concern, and automation, as the minister suggested, and that's being transferred into, I would say, we haven't seen the stats yet, but we have had in the last 2 years more labor disruptions, I would say, than we had in the last 5 years combined. So you just can list off like the public sector strike, and that was about working conditions, the longshoremen strike, Metro grocery strike. There's a hydro utility in Ottawa right now that's been out for 6 weeks in the construction industry. 2 years ago in Ontario, we had at least 7 of our unions go out on strike. And the number one issue in all of those cases is pocketbook issues. And also, interestingly enough, many of those strikes were, and Seamus would live this with the longshoremen, and that was you could spend a lot of time on what happened there. But in many of those cases, the union executive recommended to the membership that the agreement be adopted.
Yeah.
And the membership turned it down because there wasn't enough in it for them. And so this is the kind of backdrop we're looking at as we're moving towards this transition. And to the question specifically around job creation and the new jobs of the future, I mean, you referenced that report from Clean Tech. There was a report done 2 years ago from TD Bank that's saying we could lose up to 450,000 jobs in oil and gas, and then shortly thereafter there's a report from Royal Bank said, well, if we manage it right, we could actually create 600,000 new jobs, so we would have a net gain of 150,000 jobs, and I think that can happen. And I think the biggest risk to that is not so much about training. I mean, we can train our people. The biggest risk to that is twofold. I said from the beginning, regulatory. We're not going to have those new jobs if we can't get our regulatory regime right in a lot of different sectors, because we're not going to be able to get the projects to market in time. So that's critically important. So let's say that we are going to fix that regulatory regime. Like, for example, it takes 15 years to get a mining project approved in Canada right now. That's too long. It's too long for supply chain for EV batteries. Too long. So that's got to change. That's just a specific example. So let's assume we get the regulatory piece right. Then we have the job creation, and so the job creation, our industry brings in all union, non-union, about 100,000 new construction workers every year across Canada. Pretty good number. But that's just enough to keep pace with the retirements we experience in the construction industry every year. Not enough to keep pace with all these new jobs. And so there is going to be a gap. The way we need to fill that gap is return to what we did previously in terms of organically growing more tradespeople, promoting tradespeople and trades careers as a viable option to a post-secondary career. Get our shops back into our classrooms. We need to have a wholesale revamping of our education system that moved away from vocational training, some 30 years ago. That needs to happen so we can grow our vocational workers. And then we also need to look at immigration. And the government's done some good work around express entry. Up until 2 years ago, if you're a skilled trades worker, it was pretty near impossible to immigrate to Canada. They made some changes to the express entry system so skilled trades workers can immigrate to Canada right now. Some changes we need to make to that program. But those are elements that I think we really need to look at to grow organically and also to borrow and lend and leverage our immigration policy to better meet the needs of the future work in Canada.
I like that,
Jonathan.
John,
If you don't mind, I just want to interject very briefly, just to color a few points that Sean made. Firstly, well over 90% in federally regulated spaces, well over 90% of collective agreements, labor disputes are solved without there being a work stoppage. We managed to get it done, and that I have to acknowledge not only the superb mediation team in my department that helps them do that, but also employers who acknowledge that we got a labor shortage, so they better meet the union and their workers at the table and come up with solutions. Another thing I wanted to do, just to color how workers look upon energy transition, just transition, these are all toxic words that I don't use very often. But as one worker pointed out to me, you look in Alberta, for instance, you look at solar farms or wind farms, he said there are no parking lots. So think about that, right?
Yep.
We're around an oil producing facility, there are parking lots. Around a nuclear facility, there are parking lots. There are men and women who work every day to maintain the supply of that power. You build a solar farm or wind farm, walk away. So that, right there, that's something that workers tell me, it does not look too inviting. Now we're going to build more of them and more of them and more of them and more of them. So it's a construction, not a production issue. But still, that's what you're battling. And I think the other thing I would say is in BC, ultimately where we got an agreement was just the employer came together on retraining and just told the workers that we believe in training and preparing for automation and AI. That's really that was to answer the anxiety and the feeling that people had. And lastly, I just wanted to add about, the environmental assessments and our need to make sure that we move on things like new mines. Just a reminder to anybody who, a wind turbine takes 60,000 pounds of copper, every single wind turbine, 60,000 pounds of copper. So we better get mining, and we better get mining quickly. Everything that we do in the production of energy has an environmental cost, everything. So it is simply a matter of whether or not it is well managed, well maintained, or in the case of nuclear, the waste is manageable, understood, and known. But there's always a give and a take, and we've really, really got to come to terms with that. Nothing is perfect, and we're going to need all of the above.
Yeah. Pat, I wanted to get you in here because so far we've had competitive advantage thrown in. We've had talk about where you're getting the workers from, and I like what you said, that they're there. It's not about retraining. It's not about hiring. They're already there. It's about moving them over. Pat, you're at the center of this. You're hiring, you're developing, you're building. So how do you respond to what you've heard?
Look, I think at the end of the day, the opportunity is huge, right? Moving forward with it is the big question mark. What's the timeline? How do we move forward with it?
Yeah.
we have the technologies, we've got the solutions in Canada, we've got the expertise, we've got the know-how, we've got the pipeline of workers. As these key infrastructure investments get built out, as we look at the clean economy, whatever you want to call it, green, doesn't really matter. As Minister Regan said, we just have to move forward with our efforts to decarbonize the economy one way or the other. As we signal the investments being made, as we see what the opportunities are, companies like ours are able to work with the colleges, work with the halls, work with the unions and their associations to make sure that we signal the kind of jobs that are needed. And when you look at what this energy transition can look like, it's the full spectrum, right? It's not just skilled trades. It's also engineers. It's also accountants. It's lawyers. It's HR specialists. You've got the full spectrum that's going to be required. This doesn't represent a negative for employment or career opportunities in Canada. It's clearly a positive. And I think one of the things that we've seen as Ontario, between ourselves and OPG, the province is essentially investing, over $25 billion in life extending 10 nuclear units between us and Darlington. And that creates and sustains tens of thousands of jobs just in Ontario. Now, we've had to coordinate, work very closely with OPG and with the building trades to make sure that we've got a pipeline established, that we know how our projects are proceeding, what trade is needed when. And that kind of coordination and working together, as well as developing properly thought out apprenticeship programs and encouraging them and supporting them, allows for the pipeline. Because this refurbishment program from start to finish in Ontario was the better part, was set out in 2015 and is going to go right through 2033. That's many years of lots of jobs with lots of opportunity. And it's that coordination and alignment that that sets you out for success, because the opportunities are there, but we need to move forward with projects. And Sean touched on it a little. We can't let regulatory processes or political positioning around various technologies get in the way of that progress, because the opportunities there, we have to seize it. We have to move forward.
So there's a couple of issues being brought up. Unfortunately, they're all long-term. Let's be really, really clear on this one, which is we're not talking about a quick fix in a year or two. You're talking about a 5, 10, 15-year long-term with a lot of people cooperating. And we're going to get to that one as well. There's something that you said, Pat, and that Sean said that I thought was rather interesting, and that was getting students into these programs. Now, Sean, you probably know this. A lot of colleges have canceled trade programs like bricklayer because students didn't want to do it, even though the demand is absolutely ridiculously through the roof. So you've commented on the same thing, Pat, about getting people in there. What is the plan then for getting today's high school kids, elementary school kids, thinking about this as a choice so that that supply that you're looking for, Sean, is there? Whether you want to talk about a clean tech or just a skill set. And Pat, I'm going to ask you to ask that first because you were the last one, so I'm letting you first one in on this one. What do we do?
No, that's a great question, and you're right that we have to go and message this to the younger generation, and it's happening already, right? I think we got to continue to work along those lines. My daughter is 12 years old, and she's already done 2 different projects on clean energy. One of them happened to focus on nuclear, which I might have participated in a little bit. But I think it's going through our elementary school level. It's continuing in through the high school level, and we have to make sure that continues. I look at what we've kind of done in our area of Ontario, what we call the clean energy frontier. And we've got an institution there called the Nuclear Innovation Institute. And we brought in a group of just expert communicators and teachers within that organization. And they go out to the local schools and they hold virtual classes as well. And they get kids interested and they try to explain energy transition in a way that young people can understand. And they point to the opportunities. And like I said, it's not just a narrow sliver of job opportunities or career opportunities, it's the full spectrum. And once this is explained and they get the opportunity, obviously they're familiar with Bruce Power, local community, we're a big employer in the area, But we're looking to expand that and deliver it beyond just our area locally. And we're seeing more and more traction, more and more pickup on the idea of nuclear as an essential component of that net zero transition. But it's really about educating young minds, getting them interested in these aspects of what they can do with their careers in helping fight climate change. And they're interested, right? I saw an article actually come out yesterday talking about how the new younger generation of Greenpeace folks are actually pushing Greenpeace to change their view on things like nuclear. Why? Because they realize, you know, we don't have to look at this antiquated thought about nuclear being scary and this ominous force in the background that could, you know, cause problems for us all. No, it's actually a huge opportunity to fight climate change. And that pragmatic view of tackling climate change and doing the right thing, because they know that there is no next generation to pass on these problems to. They get that that stuff has to be, action has to happen now, and they're interested in playing their part. And I think paving that road, showing them that there are really good careers that can be tied to that is the key. And it's something that we're focused on as an organization. And I see, you know, provincially anyway, our the government here is starting to bake this into the curriculums at various school levels. So those are the first steps: getting young minds interested and making sure that they know that there are good jobs associated with that that energy transition.
Pat, I like that. And Scott, I'm putting you not on the line here, but I'm putting you on the line. I want you to follow up with Pat afterwards. I want to see if there's anything that links that to subsequent career choices by these kids, because that's been the question we've always asked. How do we get them moving into this direction? So thank you for that. Sean, Pat brought you into this. Seems like you're being brought in by every one of the speakers.
Yeah, well, it's always nice for a trade union to be popular. We really appreciate that. There's a couple things, you know, we can spend a lot of time on this, but I think it's critically important. So I'll start with my first point would be that unions and the construction industry in general need to do a better job of recasting what our industry is all about and what we do and how we do it. And, you know, you can talk about the linear career advancements, like many contractors who own their own businesses started off as tradespeople. And so there's a whole career path there. It starts with your apprenticeship and your journey person status, and then, you know, project director, project foreman, project manager, purchasing. There's a whole range of careers in the construction industry. But it's also important, I think, and we're coming to this realization as well, that young people are really concerned about the environment. I mean, many people in Canada are concerned about the environment, but particularly young people are more concerned about the environment than, say, my generation has been. And so this is important for young people in terms of when they're making career choices about, you know, being socially conscientious and fighting climate change. I think we have an opportunity with this transition net zero to recast our industry, come join a trade and build the, you know, the carbon-free future of Canada.
Wow.
You know, so I think that's important for us to recast what we do and how we do it, and how we're partners in this journey to net zero to help reduce carbon and improve the quality of life for everyone. In terms of some policy levers, I think it's got to start with curriculum in the high schools and the elementary schools. Pat mentioned in Ontario, now it's been mandated you have to take at least one vocational credit before you get your grade 12. So that gives people more exposure. I think people need to have more exposure to the trades. I'll give you one example of how we've changed our curriculum, so it makes it very hard for young people who are interested in a trade. Like, I live in Kitchener-Waterloo, and if you want to be a sheet metal worker, there's only one high school that offers a sheet metal program. If you want to be an electrician, there's only one high school that offers an electrician program. And you have to get there yourself. So if you live 30 kilometers away and you want to be a sheet metal worker, you have to get to that school yourself. Similarly to be an electrician. So that's got to change. We got to expose our young people to more of these careers in the trades. And then we have policy levers. The government has put in place apprenticeship services grant through the ESDC, which helps attract young people into trades, but there's incentives for contractors to bring on a first-year apprentice. The incentive is doubled if you bring on an apprentice, a woman or someone from an underrepresented group, LGBTQ+, Indigenous, etc. So that's important as a policy lever. So there's things that we can do through policy, requiring diversity requirements on federally procured construction projects, British Columbia has done a really good job with the British Columbia Infrastructure Benefits Program, where there's a mandated 25% diversity requirements on provincially procured construction projects. And so that's attracted populations from non-traditional groups into the building trades, and so into the construction industry. So there's a few examples of policy levers that are in place and that could be expanded to attract more people into the trades as well. But I think it's really important to look at that curriculum piece and expose younger people to the trades earlier.
All right, so that brings me back over to you, Seamus, and I apologize in advance because I'm going to ask you a question that I probably should never ask a politician. What we've talked about is a lot of this is communication. I get that.
Yeah.
But what Sean and Pat have just brought up, some would argue that's a labor department issue. Others would argue it's a provincial issue because we're talking about curriculum development and that is not federal.
Mm-hmm.
Others would say, along with what Pat said, no, that's an Industry Canada issue because you're talking about competitive advantage and development. Some would say it's NRC, some would say it's NRCan. So we now have an issue that all our speakers have said cuts across multiple federal departments and multiple provincial departments and multiple universities, colleges, the whole bit. The million-dollar question is, how can you manage that complexity to bring everybody online?
When the need is that great and the challenge is that important, you'd be surprised. And I don't think that there's nearly enough, good headlines. Aren't necessarily the most attractive headlines. I've worked, when I was at Minister of Natural Resources, I worked hand in glove with Sonia Savage, the Minister of Energy for Alberta, hand in glove, right from the get-go. I talk about that quite often. In fact, we led a trade delegation to Stavanger, Norway, for a massive oil and gas conference that they have there every year. She and I co-led it. Government of Alberta, Government of Canada got zero play, zero. And as a former media guy, right? I get it. I appreciate it. But it's important to know, I think it's really important and affirming for Canadians to know that across governments, people do get it and people are working at it. I work with Monty McNaughton at the Government of Ontario, fine guy, and doing really good work. I think, just objectively speaking, I mean, come campaign time, I'm sure it'll be a very different story, but we can work together because frankly, we're a country only the size of California. Like, we got to get it together. These challenges are big and they are real. I wanted to, first of all, I read that same article, Pat, on kids and nuclear, and it was very interesting because they just saw it as generational. I think one said, like, the baby boomers got to get over it. They are singularly focused on emissions. It was a fascinating article. But I wanted to come to how we all together, Jonathan, as you say, can work together on bringing more people into skilled labor, because they are the ones who build the stuff that we're talking about, like utterly essential to everything and all our ambitions and everything that we want to do. Firstly, I think Sean's absolutely right on diversity, and this isn't like wokeism as it's often just kind of derided as. If you aren't including everybody, you aren't getting the best people. You aren't getting enough people. That's the bottom line. So, encouraging more women into the skilled trades. Indigenous is a huge untapped resource, not only because of their numbers, because they're the fastest growing population in the country, but also strategically where they're located from a natural resources point of view. You're talking about the north, you're talking about close to resources, you're talking about close to projects, giving them the opportunity to make a decent wage, fulfilling work, and contribute to their communities, instead of having to fly across the country like many of my crowd do as we build up Alberta and Saskatchewan. I think, racialized Canadians, LGBTQ, like, we gotta make everybody feel open and welcome if we are going to be able to do the things that we want to do. So that's really important. Secondly, it's nothing better than good old fashioned money, right? Paying people well, making them feel secure that they'll get got a good job, got a good salary, and they'll keep getting it. The investment tax credits that we put in the last budget are massive, and what they demand in order for you to get these green tax credits, is that, and to fully maximize them, is that you hire union workers or pay a prevailing union wage. And we are working with unions. They will help us direct that, what that means when you pay a prevailing union wage in any particular jurisdiction in this country, which leads me to my third point, making sure that workers feel that they have some control over their future. Right? Sean knows we are serious about working with unions in developing these things. We've directed a lot of our training money from the federal point of view to union centers, to union training centers, letting them do it. They know the jobs, they know the construction sites, they know what's needed on the ground. Give them control over where that training money goes. But more broadly, we're setting up union advisory tables and wherever we talk about energy and energy policy, including workers and unions, so they feel they got some control over this, because they felt that they haven't. Many of them still don't. That this is just some future that we're talking about, just transition. Man, it scares the bejesus out of them. Mm-hmm. And they are the last people we need to scare or make feel anxious or make feel any more anxious. They are precisely the people that we need. I know that because I'm a member of parliament representing a constituency of a lot of oil and gas workers in a province that relies more on oil and gas revenue than Alberta. Like, I got skin in this game, I got to figure this out, because I am an avowed environmentalist as well, and I'm committed to lowering emissions, not only because we have to do it for future generations, and we're seeing the results of accumulated carbon in our environment and what it's doing now. We've got to minimize that for our children and grandchildren. But as well, it's great for the economy. It's where investment is going. It's where jobs are being built. So it's giving us a competitive advantage. And, lo and behold, I go now to our energy advocacy organization here, who dealt almost singularly with oil and gas, is now dealing with green hydrogen, is now dealing with wind power in a massive and substantial way. It is happening. Like, this is all happening. But if people feel anxious about it, they will vote for people who they think will take that anxiety away. We have to manage change better. We have to make people feel comfortable and secure about the change that is happening around us. Otherwise, the very people that we need, we're going to push to one side.
Jamie says there's a line here supporting you. It says the only people that like change are babies with wet diapers, and even they don't really like it either. So I understand what that challenge
I am
is.
stealing that line. That is a very good line. Yeah.
Good. Consider it yours. But you did bring up, in a sense, things that are working and programs that are in play. And it's a unique opportunity to ask this question. So the government has just rolled out their federal toolkit. And the toolkit consists, and I'm going to quote this, I don't want to get it wrong, a set of clear and predictable investment tax credits, low-cost strategic financing, targeted investments in programming, where necessary to respond to unique needs of sectors or projects of national economic significance. Pat and Sean, what this means in your areas is I'm doing something designed to get you moving in that direction. Okay? So when you look at the tax investments, strategic financing, targeted programming, which ones are you looking at and saying that will help bring my company in the strategic direction I have for them, the competitive advantage, and it will allow me to get these working? So when you looked at this, Pat, what was your feeling?
I tell you, really straight answer on this one. It's the ITCs, and I have to say thanks, Minister O'Regan, thanks to the federal government for the inclusion of nuclear in those ITCs, large nuclear, power up rates, and including the life extension program I talked about before. I'll just mention right now that the last time I saw Minister was actually on a plane on our way to Sean's conference in Ottawa. And we happened to run into each other on that plane, then went to the same conference. All that to say, we've been working so well together on the front of finding things that maintain that competitive advantage for companies like ours, our industry. When the states came out with their Inflation Reduction Act, it's a big incentive package, and it represents and it's attracting a lot of capital, and it's gonna set off a lot of projects. Mostly, of course, geared towards reducing carbon emissions. From our perspective, going through this life extension program and plans to expand this industry domestically, we saw this as a huge risk, right? We thought we've heard about the brain drain, to the states. we were looking at the threats of a potential skills drain to the US as well. And not to mention the manufacturing industry in Ontario that supports the work that we're doing. So with the inclusion of these ITCs, it really sent a strong signal to the province, to the country, that this government was committed to moving forward with huge nuclear projects like the ones that we're undertaking, not just new builds down the road, which we are looking at, but really the work that we have going on right now that, again, is employing tens of thousands of people. You know, the refurbs alone on any given day represent an incremental 5,000 jobs at our site as we progress these refurbishments. And if we had lost that competitive advantage, not just with other technologies here in Canada, but to the US, that was a real risk for us being able to do the work that we do. And we talk a little bit about availability of jobs. That is a strong signal to the people who, the men and women who do the work here in this province, the manufacturing base that supports our life extension program, and ultimately is playing one of the biggest impacts you can in terms of the fight against climate change. It sends the signal that this industry is here to say it's supported, and we're going to keep doing and building on this success for decades to come. So it was absolutely very important. Now, of course, we're having to make sure that we get the legislation and regulation right and landed so that it does flow through to the projects properly and the ratepayers who depend on it. But that was absolutely instrumental to us remaining competitive and keeping those good jobs going in Ontario.
Pat, I'm really happy that you said the investment tax credits are the ITCs are what you like, and I'm saying that because it means that you're not asking government for handouts. You're not saying just give me money. You're saying I'll take the risk. I'll do the investment as long as I got regulatory environment certainty and I have an ability to get a bit of a write-off afterwards. So really happy to see industry stepping forward and saying we'll take the risk. So thank you.
And a levelized playing field, right? To disadvantage us relative to other technologies, that represents a threat to our business and our industry. So that's all we're looking for, is a levelized playing field and a benefit to the ratepayer. And at the end of the day, it's the ratepayer who has to support these policy decisions around clean energy.
And what I also think is kind of cool about this is you, Bruce Power, and I hope there's others that are doing the same thing. As they succeed, they take an active role in their community in encouraging people to go into these careers, and also for fixing misinformation. Because and Seamus, this is not a knock by the government in any stretch. I think, Pat, if you and Sean are the ones going out saying this is good, it carries a lot more credibility than any government source saying the same thing. So I thank you.
I won't take that personally at all, Jonathan. No, not at all.
That's a compliment. That's using your network very appropriately.
You're absolutely
now you know what?
Right. You're dead right. You're dead right. Absolutely. I think, you know, a lot of I've fought some long and hard battles, both within government and outside, about the importance of getting language right. This is not just like a politician thing. Sean and I have had many conversations about this. If you don't, you know, language matters, right? Language matters, and just transition, whatever you think of it, and the environmental movement, a lot of them continue to use it, but it's isolating to workers. It's just got a bad name. Some of that is politically driven. Some of that, you know, was manipulated. That's absolutely doesn't work. It doesn't work if the objective is to draw more people and to make them feel secure and draw the people that we absolutely need to lower emissions and improve the competitive advantage of this country. So why continue to use it? So we just came up with sustainable jobs. I mean, it's benign. It allows me to trigger so people know what it is I'm talking about without having to rub it in their faces. But you know, we have to stop thinking as workers being, you know, collateral damage or a mild distraction or a box to check off. They are essential to getting all of this done. They're the only ones to do it. Who else knows how to, you know, where to tighten the screws on a pipeline to lower methane? Who knows how to build the wind turbines and install them? Who knows how to build the solar farms and install them? I mean, you know, so if you care about doing something about the climate crisis, you must by definition care about workers. And so we have to make them the center the center of what we are doing. And the sooner we figure that out, the better. But it's essential. It's essential.
And
And
you
Sean,
know,
that brings
Jonathan,
us back to you.
yeah, I'd like to compliment the minister and the government for their landmark work on these investment tax credits. You know, and Pat filled in the blanks pretty well there. We're not over the finish line yet. The consultations end today, and then it's got to be introduced into the House and then it's moved to regulation. But the idea behind the investment tax credits is, and I've expressed this to government, is that if you're going to provide up to 30% investment tax credit for new energy sources of the future, and you're going to provide these to large, mostly publicly owned, publicly trained, traded companies with tremendous balance sheets. If you're going to provide them that kind of tax break, which is basically a gift from the Canadian taxpayer, you better damn well make sure it's tied to good middle class paying jobs. And you know, and thankfully the government has listened. The definition of a prevailing wage will be, if we get it across the finish line, will be the union wage, which is the gold standard. And so that means if you're a non-union worker and your company gets the work from an entity that is applied and is receiving the credit, you're going to get paid the best wages and benefits in the industry, regardless of union affiliation. So this is really good public policy. And it mirrors what's happening in the Inflation Reduction Act in the US. And also attached to that is a mandatory apprenticeship requirement of at least 10%. We'd like to see that apprenticeship requirement a little bit higher, but those combinations of prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirement are going to help provide opportunities for people to get into the industry and make really good money and help build these new energy sources of the future. So this is critically important to the program moving forward for a variety of different reasons. I also think that the two other aspects of the toolkit, the strategic investments. Some of these companies aren't as well capitalized as others. Some of these projects are first in kind, like the massive carbon sequestration project in Alberta, for example, $20 billion project, and never really been done in the world before. And so I think it's important for the government to look at that from a strategic investment perspective, and there are others. And so the establishment of the Canada Growth Fund and the Canada Innovation Fund, I think, are really good parts of that toolkit to help incentivize industry to make these investments that are pretty risky. And then finally, sustainable jobs training, critically important as well. And so we have the investment tax credits to incentivize industry. We have the strategic investment opportunities to also provide incentive to industry. And then we have the training component to help train workers of the future. I think the government has really hit it out of the park in these three elements. We have some work to do to make sure we get it right in various areas, but these are really good starting blocks for this transition to net zero.
Let me just quickly jump in, Jonathan, just to say a few things. Firstly, you know, one of the reasons why we are still going through the motions on the regs around the investment tax credits is because we are having meaningful consultations with stakeholders more than anybody unions. So, you know, that is a good thing, and we're getting there on that. Secondly, the reason, you know, one of the reasons we had to do this, you know, I think there might be an assumption on some people's parts that, you know, renewable companies are automatically pro-union. They are not. There were some that were not just didn't have union workers, but were anti-union. So that was a particular problem when I came in as Minister of Natural Resources, and kind of an eye-opener to me. That was one of the reasons why workers weren't moving over to really, you know, good jobs in the renewables industry. So we need to incent that. There are good and bad players on both sides, is what I'm trying to say. And thirdly, let me tell you, as somebody who began, you know, Minister of Natural Resources portfolio with the Trump administration. And dealing with actually a fine fellow, Dan Brouillette, who was the Secretary of Energy at the time, but you know, was a climate denier. Suddenly, look at where we are right now. I mean, Pat just alluded to it. We're dealing with the Biden administration and the most sweeping industrial policy that the Americans have seen since the end of the Second World War. This is real. And that is an amazing thing in terms of what we need to do for the planet, but it is a huge competitive challenge considering that these are, you know, this is our biggest customer, our closest neighbor, and our biggest competitor. We got to keep up. I've never been more happy to have to keep up to the Americans on something. This is an extraordinary thing. and we can more than keep up. We've got a few advantages ahead of us. We've been on this a lot longer, and we've got some, very market-friendly, policies, particularly on the industrial side, and a price on pollution. The more that we can bring in things like contracts for difference, so companies, when they make those investments, know what the price on pollution will be, and there's a guarantee as they look through the life cycle of their projects, they can make investments based on that. That's exactly what it was meant to do. So we got a bit of a head start, but we have a big challenge, no question. Happy to take on this challenge, though.
Interesting that what you bring up, because you're talking about moving forward to the future. Sean, you were talking about a few changes that need to be made on programs and within the system, but generally on the right track. So I'm going to go to two of you. You got the minister in front of you. What changes do you need to regulations, to policies, to programs that will help as we move towards this economy? And Sean, you brought it up first, so you already started us on that path. And then Pat.
I don't know. Do I get the short stick, or is that the long stick on that one? I think on the regulatory side of things, and I think it's important. The minister mentioned this earlier. This isn't about cutting corners. It's not about circumventing the process. The environmental process, for example, the regulatory regime has to make sure that we hit all of those elements and has the right kind of rigor attached to it to make sure we're protecting the environment when we're trying to build something to help reduce carbon. So what I'd like to refer to it is regulatory efficiency.
Okay.
So how can we achieve regulatory efficiency when these projects are coming forward? And there's a couple of examples that the government has provided the BC government in certain cases the regulatory approval to act on behalf of the federal government. I can't remember the exact technical term, but the BC government, in consultation with the federal government, is able to make some of these regulatory approvals to expedite the process, but not circumventing any of the procedural elements. And so I think that there's efficiency that can be achieved. I think there's efficiency that can be achieved with the federal government in terms of having, I think we really need like a cross-departmental kind of task force to streamline the regulatory process and deal with the regulatory process in such a way that we can not only send a signal to industry that we're going to be able to, expedite our regulatory approvals, but also demonstrate that we're really taking this seriously. And I think that's critically important as well. So there's a couple of things that can be done there to improve the efficiency of the regulatory process.
I like that. Pat, I mean, you're seeing it from a different perspective.
Yeah, no, well, not a different perspective, but this will sound a bit self-serving as an example, but I'll take, Sean's kind of macro kind of perspective on this and give you a micro example just based on our site. So you might have noticed a couple months ago an announcement from our site that the province intend to essentially pay to have an impact assessment done at our site for up to 4,800 megawatts of new nuclear. So, when we talk, or when Sean's mentioning some of the regulatory processes, the impact assessment is one, and it's one that is relatively new and came out of legislation that was brought about a few years ago, and largely untested, certainly not tested for the nuclear industry. When we look at our site as an operating site with decades of experience, we've done decades and decades and report after report on environmental baseline studies and provided this stuff to the federal government by way of the CNSC, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, a number of federal agencies, and it's been studied, approved. We're familiar with our communities, we're familiar with the product. At the same time, if we start the impact assessment process, it's as though we're starting from scratch. So, we think that there's a huge opportunity here, and I don't want it to sound like the government's not listening. Like, this is something that we've been sharing with NRCan, the PCO, as well as the Impact Assessment Agency, and it's resonating. Let's take the stuff we've done. Let's take the body of work we've done, the regulatory processes, the reports, the studies. Let's leverage that and find a way to prioritize projects like ours where we know the impact, we're familiar with it. It's not about circumventing, just like Sean said. It's about finding the efficiencies, not being duplicative in our efforts, not being duplicative in the bureaucratic process of reviewing these submissions. Let's take what's done is done and address the stuff that's net new to the file as we look at new megawatts online. And of course, a big portion of what the impact assessment focuses on is working with Indigenous communities. And the last thing I want to leave this group with is the thought that we want to circumvent that. We know that working with our Indigenous communities is a top priority, and we're looking to fully engage and already have started engaging in a pre-planning type element of work with them to make sure that we're moving through the process in a really robust and a partnership view toward the development of that potential for 4,800 megawatts of electricity. And when you look at the climate change needs and what we have to get built over a short period of time, if it takes 8 years just to get a permit and then X number of years to build after that, we're not going to meet those targets. So that's why we need to find ways to leverage some of the work that's already been done and get shovels in the ground faster.
I also like, Pat, that you're talking not just about the Clean Tech Initiative, but you're talking about other important priorities as well with Indigenous communities and others that we could talk about as well to be brought in. And any sort of program or policy that doesn't respect the other priorities is going to fail. We know that at a variety of levels. So thank you for bringing that in. And Sean, I can see you're positive. Now, I know we got to go to closing comments from each of you. We got to do a few Q&As, but I'm going to be opportunistic now. I really have to be. Given the many of your comments around misinformation, misunderstanding, I like, Pat, we talked about the nuclear discussions. This is polarization. There's no question about that. And Seamus, you did talk about energy polarization as being heavily polarized. So I guess the question is, and polarization is important for a whole bunch of reasons. I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but the Senate has started looking into polarization at the early stages of the process. What is happening in your view with polarization around energy, and what do we need to do in the years ahead to deal with this polarization? And Seamus, you gave the speech in 2021. I'm not asking you to go back to it, but I'm asking you to start off this part of the discussion.
Okay, I'm going to bring up two really good points, 2 points based on what we just heard, though. Firstly, on Indigenous communities, very close to this. I grew up near an Indigenous community, did my graduate degree on how we can be more inclusive about including Indigenous communities, First Nations, Métis, Inuit with large-scale natural resource development in this country. You don't just do it for its own sake. You don't do it just because it's the right thing to do. Absolutely. You also do it because, frankly, if you move together with Indigenous communities and landholders, you're going to get to where you want to go a lot faster. We tried the alternative during the Harper years, and it was just, for investors, it was up and down. You're in the courts, you're out of the courts, you're appealed, you got another judge, blah, blah, blah. Like that's not how you do it. You need to bake it into and you need to do some of the work on the front end so it looks like it's longer, but it's actually a lot more secure. And then, frankly, folks, in natural resource development in this country, them are the facts. More often than not, you are dealing with a First Nations, Inuit, or Métis community that are the landholders that you have to deal with, the rights holders that you have to deal with. So just get it done in the beginning. And the more we treat communities at the outset of this process with dignity and respect, the better your chances of having a fulsome and real partner that is willing and wants to build with you. Secondly, on efficiencies and red tape, labeling, again, people immediately associate cutting red tape with cutting necessary environmental regulation. That is not true. I can tell you from the way that we've done a regional environmental assessment on the offshore of Newfoundland, by providing that baseline, Pat was alluding to this earlier, by doing the work in the beginning, then when you look at a particular area, a lot of that work has already been done. You also have a much more fulsome and holistic view because you're looking at you're not just looking at a one area in isolation. You're looking at how, like, fish swim, right? For instance, in the offshore, you're looking at how the fish over here may be affected by what you're doing over here. You can handle that in a regional environmental assessment. And in fact, for exploratory wells on our offshore, we reduced the waiting time from 900 days to 90. while improving the integrity of the environmental assessment process. So we just have to be smart about these things. Lastly, on polarization, and the point that you asked me, what you wanted me to make, we got to be smart about it. You know, we have to understand that we got to mean it when we say that we want to include everybody. You know, workers are smart. If you really want to make them feel included and make them feel important, show them the money, the benefits, show them the job security. You know, this speaks volumes to people, because it says to them, we're investing in you, and this is a long-term prospect. And that's what people want to know when they're paying mortgages and they're having to suffer through you know, increasing interest rates. Please God, stabilizing now, but you know, people are looking for something tangible. Give them the respect and the dignity of demonstrating that this isn't just like, oh, we want you to do the right thing and la 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 la. No, like, we're willing to invest because your work is important and essential. I think that would be helpful, because what you're fighting is something that we, you know, haven't really seen, you know, not as revolutionary perhaps since Gutenberg put out the printing press, and that's social media. And its ability to rage farm, as we say, its ability to draw on people's anxieties and skew our politics is very, very real. You know, trying to keep a step ahead of that is hard. But one of the first things that you can do, as I said, is in a very tangible way demonstrate to workers that, you know, their contribution is not only real, it is utterly essential. And the best way to do that is in a tangible way, show your appreciation. That's through job security, good benefits, meaningful long-term employment, good, decent pay.
Good. Pat, to you on the polarization?
Look, the best way to tackle polarization is to create opportunities that benefit everyone, right? Decisions, policy decisions, infrastructure decisions, energy transition decisions that create good jobs, manage risks for ratepayers, and ultimately provide the energy that we count on when we flip the light switch on. You know, those are things that won't get caught up in issues around polarization. You know, you heard my job description before. I worry all the time about the polarization that can take place between supportive, anti. You know, nuclear in the past has been one of those things that you're either for or against. I think we're finding now that there's more groups that are interested in hearing more and learning more, and that's a good place to be, and something that we're driving toward. You know, like I say, I think that as we look at what that transition means in terms of fighting climate change, whether you believe in climate change or not, you're going to need more energy. You're going to need more electricity. Everybody likes to have good jobs. These are the policy decisions that help counter the ideas of polarization, whether it's political or otherwise, that gets things moving.
I like that. Sean, to you.
Well, I don't know. The question of polarization really is the question of our time, isn't it? Like, you know,
No.
the more connected we are, the more disconnected we are, which is counterintuitive. You know, when social media came onto the scene and the internet, and there was I remember the predictions about bringing society more closer together, improving literacy, and you know, some of those things may have happened, but overall, I think that it's kind of, you know, made society more disconnected rather than connected, even though they might be connected physically through all these different channels. And so I think it's you know, important to recognize that. I think many people feel left out of the economic equation. I think many people feel powerless, and they are expressing that lack of power through different activities that are quite uncommon to the Canadian way of life. You know, you have the protest in Ottawa, the trucker convoy. It's going through the court system now, and you had that. And I lived that, and I talked to many of those people when we was going back and forth to work, and you had the similar thing in Alberta, and then you have like public displays of you know, almost violence, like, you know, the attacks against the prime minister, etc. Which is just kind of, you know, for my generation looking at it, it's like, well, what the hell is going on here? So polarization is a huge issue, a huge question. And I think that, part of it definitely is show us the jobs, show us that this is really going to work. And I think that's critically important. And I also think part of that, given this context of being a connected world, we have to get the messaging right. And, I compliment Seamus and the work that we've done and the conversations we had on getting that messaging right. And there's a disconnect from people who are very well-meaning and well-intentioned to make public policy in this country to what's happening on the ground. And that sometimes happens in the language that's used. So we have to be, I think, a little bit more cautious about the kind of language we use and how we position this change and demonstrate empathy. So that would be my kind of suggestions on how to deal with the polarization as we go through this process.
I like that the three of you have dealt with the concept of inclusiveness, making sure people feel they're being listened to. And I always like announcing future programs if the Pearson's going to do, even when we haven't committed to it, but I commit them to it. I was speaking to Indigenous leaders about what you're talking about, and they have a decision-making model that focuses on inclusiveness and cohesiveness. Listen, there's a lot of cool things about it. They've written about it. We're going to actually have a program around that where the Indigenous community is going to help us learn how to make complex decisions where you have to bring communities together. Now, we'll talk more about that later on, but it's kind of a way of bringing your Indigenous interests together with complex decision making, only they're going to help us. So I thank you all for that. Scott, I want to bring you in now because I realize we're running close to the end of the time, and I want to make sure that we get a couple of the audience questions in. But to the three of you, thank you for this amazingly interesting discussion. I was going to join in on this panel. There's Scott, buddy.
How are you, sir? Great job. That was well done. We talked about a whole bunch of things, including parking lots, to the future of the nuclear industry, which is going to depend on Pat's daughter, who's working on a project now to save it, certainly to make it much better. We even talked about the signing of the Atlantic Charter in Placentia Bay between Roosevelt and Churchill. So there we go. So this has been really something. I want to thank you all for your time, because it has been, I know your time is precious. You shared with us. Just on the last point about polarization, here at the Pearson Center, we have a very simple formula by which we like to reduce polarization as we talk it out. Our namesake Lester Pearson from 1963 to 68 did a substantial amount of work to improve our country, to make it the greatest country in the world, which it is today. So I want to thank you for that. Couple questions. One of the questions came from Mary, who wrote to me directly about the education aspect of trades, particularly. I think you've pretty much addressed all of that, including the part where Sean talked about proximity to some of these opportunities of people of education in his area, comparing electricians, sheet metal workers. Good point. So I'll leave that. There is one dimension though that I want to bring up, which came in through our question box, and this is from Larry. And Larry talks about AI, which we haven't really talked about in this. And his question, I'll read it verbatim. A great panel, folks. Congratulations. It seems that the private sector approach to AI is fueled by the search for increased profits. Perfectly normal. The question is whether that profitability will come from reduced labor costs or increased revenue from market share and opportunities, perhaps a combination. What do you think? So the dimension of AI in the future and how this is going to affect our industry. And Jonathan, I'll back to you.
Oh, you're in charge of this one, buddy, and not me. You're handling this. So who do you want to select to answer it?
Oh, this is great. I didn't realize. I'm new.
Oh boy.
That's good. Let's go to Sean. Sean.
Well, sure. I think in construction, not so much AI, but we have seen lots of initiatives to improve productivity in construction, and some have failed and some have succeeded. I think that as we progress, and I say this to our stakeholders and to our board, that as we progress through this upcoming massive requirement for skilled labor, that we run the risk, if we don't supply that, these projects still need to get built. And I think you'll see increased adoption of technologies at a quicker rate. So there are, Scott, there are machines that can build that brick wall behind you today. They don't work very well, but they are there. Three-dimensional printing can build a small house, for example. And then you have technologies that are using drones to manage supply chain and just-in-time ordering. And so construction is evolving. We are a late adopter to technology, but I think that would increase, and AI would obviously be a part of that as these projects need to get built, and we can't supply regular labor to do it. So I think it's something we need to pay attention to.
Well, that's a good point, certainly. And obviously, not just AI, as you point out, was the other efficiencies within all of our industries to make us more efficient, quicker, and so on and so forth. I go to Pat now, and Pat, certainly industrial efficiencies is an important topic, certainly for your sector, when it comes to not just for production of power, but certainly for nuclear power. Pat?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I hope that my daughter's not using ChatGPT to do her nuclear project. But other than that, when you look at the applications of AI, it's the tip of the iceberg, right? And we're just learning just how far we can go with these things. But when you think about operating efficiency, and already this industry, like our industry, has come so far from when we built these incredible machines. As we progress through our refurbishment program, we're getting things done in ways that we never thought we could before, through automation, through advanced mechanical techniques, and of course the use of some AI. And when I look at the future, what that represents in terms of innovation and opportunities that way, things like extra overhead to keep parts on hand, and unplanned outages because some maintenance wasn't done, all that can start to go away, right? We can have predictive maintenance, we can have schedule planning that's done automatically, which would take thousands of man hours to plan these things out. And the opportunity it represents isn't just to increase revenue. It frees people up to do other projects and expand this industry. And when we talk about meeting the climate change needs and net zero by 2050, we're going to need more facilities like these. We're going to need better construction plans. We're going to need all kinds of efficiencies to get things done and leverage the labor force and workforce that we have. And things like AI are just another tool to make all of that possible in an efficient way. And again, one that ratepayers can get behind. Because at the end of the day, if the ratepayer, the voter, doesn't support the policy because it's too expensive or is costing them too much from a perception perspective, it won't happen, right? So that's why we need to do things the right way, efficiently, cost effectively, that ultimately fight climate change, but at the same time protect ratepayers. And I think that's some of the opportunity that AI represents.
Well, that's interesting, because that's sort of the word of efficiency. Some people would equate it to job loss. I think Sean touched on this earlier about when he talked about not net zero jobs. When people talk about net zero in the general concept of the climate going up to 2050, and of course major targets coming in 2030. Minister, I'm going to just let you finish your thoughts on that. I'm sure this is not a strange discussion to be had at the cabinet table concerning AI. I'm not asking you to discuss that part, but certainly if you want to just add your comments to what's just been said.
I brought up AI at the beginning of the conversation. Thanks for paying attention, Scott. Really appreciate it.
Sorry.
I brought it up because I think the first way that AI is affecting us is the anxiety that it's generating. Before we even have an idea of its applications, of how pervasive its applications could be, and I think they could be quite pervasive. I think it'll, I feel like I'm at the dawn of God, I'm old enough to remember Mosaic, let alone Netscape, when you'd just be waiting for the image to event. And I was relying on Happy Valley, Goose Bay, Labrador broadband at the time. You can only imagine, Scott, how long an image would take. I think, and look at us now, I think it's even more revolutionary than the browser and the internet. And I think, but but its effects are already being felt because of the anxiety that people have. There's a certain technological savviness that we all have now because we all have phones. Almost everybody has a phone. Almost everybody has an idea of how much this has changed us. And so the idea that there's this big looming new thing has already affected our politics and has already affected workers. And it was a huge factor. It took us too long to really figure it out, but it was a huge factor in BC with the longshoremen on automation and AI. It was what I was calling the specter of AI. The thought of it, that was already affecting it before we even have an idea of what the applications could be. So Sean knows we're sitting down. We've got that union-led advisory table to talk about that. Like, how do we, in a way that includes workers in a meaningful way, how do we keep an eye on this? How do we, as I would call it, how do we worry wisely about it? Right? You don't want to overreact. You want to, but you have to kind of make sure that you, as best you can, this is the really difficult part, stay just ahead of it, so that we are on top of, and being as nimble as we can, we are on top of it. I'm a firm believer that now that we are developing tools that include, I think, the most important stakeholder in this, which would be, workers, as I think business and industry starts to invest heavily in this on their own, it will allow government to be more nimble. It will hopefully allow us to have a clearer view of how these things are affecting our workforce on the ground, and therefore allow us to make quicker changes in terms of regulation and all the important things that we need to do to make sure that we look after one another. I don't want us to be too afraid of it. This could be an incredible, incredible thing, like any other major technological advance that has come our way. When it's used wisely, these are amazing things that have made our lives better. And AI could be the same. But there are also significant risks, and we don't know them yet. We don't even know what we don't know yet. And workers get that too. So there's an underlying anxiety that we do have to start to deal with right now. And it gets back to what I said before about, one of the meaningful ways that you can attract more workers to the workforces that we need is making sure that they have some semblance of control, that they have some, that they are sitting at the right tables and that they are leading those tables. That's the work that we can do immediately. But we are looking into the maw of something dark, foreboding, and maybe miraculous. I don't know, but it's going to be big. And we can start, we got to start putting our heads around it now.
Thank you so much, everybody. I'm going to have to cut it there. We're like 2 minutes shy of our max time. Good points. I apologize. I didn't hear you talk about AI in the beginning. I had you on mute. You're safe to know that there's no
You've
reflection.
Had me on mute for years, Scott.
Well, yes, but only periodically. Only periodically. It was just it was a judgment call. I'm sure what you said was, as we say in Newfoundland, best kind. But nevertheless, it's more about distraction than anything else. Nevertheless, Minister, good job. Sean Strickland, thank you so much. Pat Dalzell, thank you. Say hello to everybody from your respective organizations. We hope to be calling on you again at some point soon. Professor Khalaf, thank you for the wonderful discussion. That was fabulous. Folks, if you just joining us now, or you want to get the whole conversation, it will be available on YouTube. Watch out in your inboxes. They will be there very shortly. And any comments that you have, please let us know at thepearsoncentre.ca. Thank you, folks, for being involved in this. And
Thank you, Scott. Thank you.
We'll leave it at that, and we look forward to the future discussion. And thanks from all of us.